Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the very first Q&A, what we like to call a new adventure in democracy where you get to ask the questions. Well, to mark our first program, we have the honour of being joined by the Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd. Please welcome him. Okay, with the Labor government just 2 days away from celebrating its 6-month anniversary, there's a lot to talk about. Mr Rudd will spend the next hour answering questions on whatever topics you feel are important. To ask those questions, our pioneering audience, give yourselves a round of applause. Okay. All right, first, the ground rules. Before the program, our audience members submitted their questions on topics of current interest on the web, by SMS or here in the ABC studio. We've chosen what we think are the best of those questions, and importantly, the Prime Minister has not seen the questions. He'll have to answer off the cuff. The audience will also be given the opportunity to ask follow-up questions during the discussion and to jump in. Well, if you're watching this first program at home, you can also put questions via SMS by simply texting us your name, suburb and question to the number on your screen, 197 55 222, 197 55 222. And before we start, Prime Minister, we should tell you we've had an extraordinary level of interest in the program. More than 1,000 questions were submitted to the program before we went to air. Not surprisingly, a lot of them were about petrol prices. So let's go now to our first question from Andrew Cox.
All right. Today saw another record high price for crude oil. Given the limited supply of fossil fuels in nature, can you outline what the government is doing to ensure that an alternative exists for the future?
Well, probably about a month into the government's life, we commissioned Martin Ferguson, the Minister for Resources, to commission an energy strategy for Australia. That work's now underway. This country at present doesn't have an energy security strategy. We need one, and one which actually embraces all the alternative energy options for the future. We don't have the answers for that right now, but we're about 4 months into that project. We hope to begin to have the first publication of aspects of its outcome by year's end. But you're right. If you're looking around the world today, there is a real challenge with fossil fuel supply. And it leaves to one side, of course, the challenge which fossil fuels of themselves represent when it comes to climate change.
Let me just jump in there. Are you working, I should say, Prime Minister, on a plan for what happens if oil reaches $200 a barrel, as many are now predicting? Because that would obviously feed into inflation in this country and it would inevitably lead to interest rate rises.
Well, it's a hydra-headed monster. That's the truth. It's all the climate change dimensions we're familiar with. There is the basic energy security dimensions which some nations are now familiar with, ours prospectively, depending on how things unfold. And then you've got the flow-through effect on the economy. One of the huge drivers at present of what we've got by way of domestic inflation is out of energy prices. So to go to your question, no, we don't have a $200 a barrel sort of threshold for where we click in, but what we did discover when we formed government was there is no long-term energy security strategy for Australia, period. Therefore, we're in the process of developing one. I'm not going to tell you at this stage what I think the outcome will be. We're still in the development phase, but it's time the nation, I think, had some straight talking on it, and some of the options may be quite hard. All
right, we've got some questions already from the audience. Let's go to this gentleman down the front here with the striped jumper.
The rebate on the photovoltaic solar panels. What are you now going to do with that, given that fuel is going to go up, and that must be an important part of your strategy? So what, Prime Minister?
On solar, for example, we've got a whole range of options. There's a rebate for solar panels on roofs. There's currently a program, but I'm just about to go through the rest. There is a rebate arrangement for solar hot water systems, which, by the way, is means tested, and it has been that way since it was first introduced. On top of that, we've got also a $300 million program for very low interest loans for people seeking to install solar on their roofs. That is new, and we anticipate that that can provide low-cost finance for about 200,000 households, as opposed to the few thousand households each year which make use of the direct rebate. On top of that, $400 or $500 million program for ensuring that all of Australia's 9,000 schools end up with solar panels on their roofs. That's a new program.
Well, you heard the audience there. I mean, they're obviously not happy about this fact that you've changed the rebate system for these solar panels. Now, tell us why you did it, because if it isn't that many houses taking advantage of it, it can't be very expensive, yet it seems counterproductive.
Well, prior to the election, let's just nail it on the head here, we said we'd expend $150 million on this program, and that's what we're doing. And in fact, we're bringing forward to slice that money into the earlier years to make sure that we up the uptake, I think, from memory, about 3,000 to about 6,000 in, I think, a 12-month period. I stand to be corrected on the exact numbers. But it applies to everything. Sooner or later, you've got to work out whether these sorts of arrangements from government should be means-tested to make them more available to people on low to middle income levels in Australia, or not. Now, what we've done progressively with a range of payments through the government system in this budget is to apply a means testing system to it. It's not perfect, but we take the judgment that you've got to draw the line somewhere. And the other thing I'd just say is it brings this program into line with what has already existed and introduced by the previous government for rebates for solar hot water systems.
OK, there's several people who want to respond to that. Over here, we'll take the lady in the red dress first. Yes, you're there.
I just want to know what you're doing about the jobs which are going to be lost in the renewable energy industry. Because they've already lost something like overnight, one group have already lost $375,000 worth of business in one night.
Well, can I say that when it comes to the whole future of alternative energy for Australia, we have to develop an emissions trading scheme, and we're on track to do that. As we move towards that, as we move towards the implementation of our mandatory renewable energy target of 20% by 2020, let me tell you, a whole lot of existing government programs, including the one that we've just been talking about, will change. That's just the truth of it. We are now trying to catch up in terms of the whole raft of alternative and renewable energy policy from a previous government which frankly had its head buried in the sand for more than a decade. We've been in for 5 months. It's hard to do. We intend to get there. But as we get closer to getting these big policy shifts in order, a emissions trading regime, renewable energy target on track, it follows that the programs, including the one that you've just referred to, and I'm aware of the consequences that you've just referred to as well, and I don't dismiss that, all these will be adjusted over time. But right now, we've actually got to cut our cloth to make sure it fits, and that applies to the totality of the government's budget. OK, we'll take one more question on this. There's a gentleman over there with a moustache.
Thank you. Until we reach this point, is it possible from the government to help the hard-working Australians family by have a tax exemption for the cost of the fuel and the car repairs, for example, or the interest of their home mortgage until we reach the difficult time, until we get to that top where the government can go?
Well, you see, our attitude in terms of working Australians, working families, under financial pressure, or people just doing it tough out there, is that there are a range of things that you can do to try and put some more money into the family budget or the individual's budget. And that applies to tax policy. And if you look at the tax changes which will come in from 1 July, this is a tax package of about $45 billion targeted on low and middle income earners. Then you go to childcare tax rebate, increasing from 30% to 50% in one hit. That's actually very big. And for the first time in the country's history, an education tax refund, it'll cost us something like $4 or $5 billion, so that you pay for parts of your kids' education on identified items, and there is a 50% rebate up to a certain amount, $750 for primary school kids, $1,500 a year for secondary school kids. And you add all those things together, it's designed to put more money into the budget. We know that the cost pressures are very big on the other side of the ledger. Petrol prices, cost of groceries, cost of rents, cost of mortgages, all going up. I don't have a silver bullet for those, but what I can do